The limousine door opened, and Nathaniel Carson's world stopped. The woman stepping onto his Aspen estate in a navy gown wasn't just a ghost from his past. She was a wife he abandoned 23 years ago when she nearly died giving birth to his twins. Beside her stood his estranged half-brother, now a billionaire. And flanking them, two striking young men whose faces mirrored his own. Cameras flashed. Whispers erupted. His fiancée gasped. But nothing prepared him for what happened next. When one of those young men walked straight up to him, smiled coldly, and said, "Hello, father. You told everyone you never had children. Let me remind you. Tonight, the man who erased his family would be erased himself." Before we dive into this powerful story of betrayal, strength, and ultimate redemption, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. If this hook already has you hooked, smash that like button right now. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Are you Team Forgiveness or Team Karma? And don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that dignity always wins in the end. Now, let's begin. 23 years ago, Claire Cole believed love could conquer anything. She was 23, standing nervously in a Chicago conference hall presenting her eco-housing concept to a room full of skeptical investors who saw her youth before her talent. Then Nathaniel Carson walked in late, unapologetic, commanding attention effortlessly in his tailored suit and confident smile. He listened to her entire presentation without looking away once, then approached afterward. "You don't just design buildings," he said, his voice warm and certain. "You design hope? That's rare." Within weeks, he was calling every night, sharing dreams of empire building together. Within months, he proposed beneath the Chicago skyline at Millennium Park, city lights reflecting in his eyes like promises. She said yes without hesitation, wearing white lace and daisies at their wedding, convinced she found her person, her partner, her forever. She believed every word he said. The first year of marriage felt like a beautiful dream. Nate showered Claire with everything. Designer dresses that made her feel guilty. Weekend getaways to Lake Geneva where they watched sunsets from borrowed yachts. Late-night conversations about building their future together. He introduced her to influential clients, always with his hand on the small of her back, always saying, "This is my brilliant wife." Claire moved from her modest South Side apartment into his penthouse overlooking the Chicago River. The view took her breath away every morning. But slowly, cracks appeared. He worked later, came home smelling of expensive perfume that wasn't hers, took phone calls in locked rooms. When she asked questions, he'd smile and say, "Jealousy doesn't suit you, darling." She swallowed her doubts, convincing herself that marriage required trust, that love meant faith. She ignored the warning signs, believing her devotion could seal the fractures forming beneath their perfect surface. She was wrong. When Claire discovered she was pregnant with twins, Nate's reaction seemed perfect initially. He kissed her forehead, called her his miracle, even arranged a magazine photo shoot titled "Chicago's Power Couple Expecting." But as her belly grew, his interest faded dramatically. He traveled more, worked later, smiled less at her. The night her water broke 3 weeks early, she called him 7 times in the taxi, rushing to the hospital. He was at a business dinner and refused to leave immediately. She arrived alone and terrified, contractions tearing through her body in waves. Then everything went catastrophically wrong. Her blood pressure spiked dangerously high. The baby's heart rates dropped alarmingly. Doctors rushed her into emergency surgery, explaining she needed an immediate cesarean section, or she and the twins might not survive the next hour. When Nate finally arrived 60 minutes later, reeking of whiskey and someone else's perfume, a doctor pulled him aside urgently. "Your wife's life is in serious danger. We need to operate now." Nate's face went pale, his hands trembling visibly with fear and something else, resentment at being pulled from his other life. The surgery took 4 grueling hours. Nate waited in the corridor, pacing and checking his phone obsessively, looking for any excuse to leave this sterile nightmare. When a nurse finally emerged with 2 tiny bundles, she smiled tiredly. "Your sons are healthy, Mr. Carson. Your wife pulled through, but barely. She's in recovery." Nate stared at the infants. Carter and Jackson, according to names Claire had chosen months ago. They were small, fragile, completely dependent. A photographer Nate had called earlier appeared suddenly, ready to capture the moment for society pages. "Mr. Carson, hold your sons to the camera, please," the photographer instructed. Nate took them awkwardly, forcing a proud father smile while the camera flashed repeatedly. The moment the photographer finished, Nate handed the babies back to the nurse. "I need some air," he muttered, walking toward the exit. He never came back. Not that night. Not the next day. Not ever. When Claire woke 12 hours later, groggy and aching from surgery, she found an empty chair beside her hospital bed and 2 babies she'd have to raise completely alone. Claire spent 3 days in the hospital, waiting for Nate to return, to explain, to apologize, to be the husband and father she desperately needed. He never showed. The nurses exchanged pitying glances when she asked about him. On the day she was discharged, her best friend Maya arrived to drive her home because Nate wouldn't answer his phone. Claire returned to their penthouse, carrying 2 infant car seats, her abdomen screaming in pain from the fresh surgical incision, to find half of Nate's belongings already gone. For 6 months, she heard nothing. No calls, no texts, no financial support, nothing but deafening silence. She survived on savings that dwindled terrifyingly fast, trying to care for twins while recovering from major surgery completely alone. Then, when Carter and Jackson were exactly 6 months old, a courier delivered a thick envelope. Inside were divorce papers, clinical and cold, offering a modest settlement and demanding 0 custody or visitation rights. Attached was a note in Nate's handwriting. "This life isn't for me. You'll manage. You always do." Claire signed with shaking hands while her baby slept, finally understanding she was truly alone, with a divorce settlement, far less than she deserved after lawyers took their share. Claire moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Southside Chicago, where paint peeled from walls and neighbors argued loudly through thin walls. She sold every piece of jewelry Nate had given her, every designer item that carried his memory, anything that could be converted to cash for survival. Her first night in that apartment, she sat on worn carpet surrounded by unpacked boxes, exhausted and heartbroken. Carter began crying. Then Jackson joined him in stereo. Claire lifted them both, held them close against her chest, and made a fierce promise through her tears. She would survive this nightmare. She would build them a good life. No matter what it cost her, no matter how many jobs she had to work, no matter how little sleep she got, she would never abandon them the way their father had. They would know they were loved, wanted, cherished. She would be enough for them, even when she didn't feel like enough for herself. The next 7 years were an endless battle for survival that tested every ounce of Claire's strength. She worked 3 jobs simultaneously. Freelance architecture drafting during the twins' naps, waitressing a late shift at an all-night diner from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and weekend shifts cleaning downtown office buildings. Every single dollar was carefully allocated. Diapers, formula, rent, utilities, daycare at Mrs. Patterson's church basement, where she charged half price because she recognized desperate determination in Claire's exhausted eyes. Sleep became an impossible luxury Claire couldn't afford. She sketched building designs on napkins during her 15-minute dinner breaks, dreaming of the day she could practice her craft full-time instead of just surviving. Carter and Jackson grew despite the financial hardship. Carter became quiet and thoughtful, always watching and learning, while Jackson developed a bold, fiercely protective streak even as a toddler. When they turned 5, they asked the inevitable question while watching other children play with their fathers at the park. "Mama, why don't we have a daddy?" Jackson asked, his small voice confused and hurt. Claire knelt down, fighting back tears that threatened to overwhelm her. "Your daddy had to go away," she said as gently as possible, refusing to poison their hearts with bitterness. "But you have me, and I promise it will always, always be enough." When the twins turned 7, Claire's life shifted in an unexpected direction. Her former architecture professor, Dr. Helena Chun, called with a career-changing referral. "I have a client seeking an architect with vision and integrity, someone who designs with heart rather than just chasing profit." Dr. Chun explained carefully. "I immediately thought of you, Claire." The client was Dominic Marshall, founder of Marshall Global, a technology and energy conglomerate worth billions that was rapidly expanding internationally. Claire almost declined the meeting. What would a billionaire possibly want with her modest portfolio of community centers, small playground renovations, and affordable housing sketches? But desperation and a tiny flicker of hope pushed her forward. They met in a quiet downtown cafe, not the intimidating corporate boardroom she'd feared. Dom arrived in worn jeans and a simple gray sweater, no assistants, no entourage, no visible arrogance. He studied her portfolio in complete silence for 20 long minutes, while Claire fidgeted nervously with her coffee cup, absolutely certain he'd politely dismiss her work as too small-scale for his needs. Finally, he looked up, his expression thoughtful and surprisingly kind. "You design with soul," he said quietly. "Most architects design for ego or profit margins. You design for people, for community, for genuine meaning. That's exactly what I need." He offered her the contract that same afternoon. The Marshall Global Headquarters project transformed Claire's career and, unexpectedly, her entire life. Over 9 intense months, she poured every ounce of her creativity and passion into converting a cold, intimidating glass corporate tower into something genuinely revolutionary, a workspace that prioritized abundant natural light, integrated green spaces throughout, welcoming community gathering areas, and even affordable on-site childcare facilities for employees. Architecture magazines called it the future of compassionate corporate design that prioritizes humanity. Industry awards followed quickly. More clients started calling. Interview requests flooded in from design publications. But what surprised Claire most wasn't the sudden professional success. It was Dominic Marshall himself, who defied every stereotype she'd built about wealthy, powerful men. He visited the construction site weekly, asking genuinely thoughtful questions about her design philosophy and intent, never micromanaging or undermining her creative vision. He noticed when exhaustion shadowed her eyes and gently insisted she take breaks. When the twins were 8 years old, Dom started appearing at their apartment with carefully chosen gifts. Signed experiment kits for Carter, who loved understanding how things worked, quality soccer equipment for Jackson, who had boundless energy, and books about inventors and dreamers for both. "My father used to bring me things like this before he died when I was young," Dom explained once, unmistakable sadness flickering across his face. "I know exactly what it's like growing up without one." Dom became woven into their daily lives so gradually that Claire didn't consciously notice until he'd become absolutely essential to their family rhythm. He attended Carter's school art show and enthusiastically bought 3 crayon drawings, framing them professionally in his downtown office like they were priceless Picassos. He taught Jackson how to properly kick a soccer ball with seemingly endless patience, spending entire Saturday afternoons at the park. He showed up faithfully on their birthdays carrying homemade cake because Claire had mentioned once, almost embarrassed, that she couldn't afford expensive bakery prices. At first, Claire actively resisted growing closer, terrified of trusting another man, of allowing someone near enough to hurt her sons the devastating way their father had. But Dom never pushed for more than she felt ready to give. He didn't make grand declarations or empty promises about the future. He simply showed up consistently, month after month, year after year, proving through steady actions rather than pretty words that he was fundamentally different from Nate. One rainy Tuesday evening, when the twins were 9, they walked together through Millennium Park after sharing pizza. Jackson grabbed Dom's hand without consciously thinking, then looked up, surprised at his own instinct. Dom squeezed back gently and naturally, as if he'd been waiting for that moment forever. Claire watched him ahead of her on the path, her throat suddenly tight with an emotion she still wasn't quite ready to name yet. By the time Carter and Jackson turned 10, something profound had shifted permanently in Claire's carefully guarded heart. She found herself eagerly watching for Dom's car in the evenings, genuinely smiling when his name appeared on her phone, feeling noticeably lighter and happier when he was near. One Saturday afternoon, he took all 3 of them to Navy Pier for the day. As they rode the iconic Ferris wheel high above sparkling Lake Michigan, Carter and Jackson argued playfully in the seat directly behind them about which career path was objectively better, architecture or business. Dom turned to Claire when they reached the top, his expression unusually nervous and vulnerable. I need to tell you something I've been feeling for a very long time, he said, his voice barely audible over creaking wheel and distant sounds of the pier below. Her heart hammered violently against her ribs. I've been deeply in love with you for over 2 years now, he continued, words tumbling out in a rush. I didn't say anything because I wanted to be absolutely certain. Certain you could genuinely trust me after everything you've been through. Certain the boys felt completely safe with me. Certain I could truly be what all 3 of you needed and deserved. I don't want to be just another person who promises forever and then disappears when things get difficult. So I'm not making empty promises. I'm asking a question. Will you let me try to earn your forever, one honest day at a time? Tears filled Claire's eyes as she nodded, completely unable to form coherent words. He kissed her softly while Chicago sparkled below them, and it felt like finally, truly coming home after years of being lost. Dom proposed a year later, but not impulsively or as some grand public gesture. First, he sat down privately with Carter and Jackson, treating the conversation with profound gravity it genuinely deserved. I want to ask your mom to marry me, he told them with complete seriousness, but I need to know honestly how you two feel about that possibility. This decision affects your lives just as much as hers. Carter said yes immediately, his young face lighting up with pure joy. Jackson was quieter, more cautious and thoughtful, his protective instincts toward his mother evident even at 11 years old. Will you leave us if things get hard or complicated? He asked, his face impossibly serious for someone so young. Dom knelt to Jackson's eye level, meeting his gaze directly. I can't promise life will always be easy or perfect, he said with complete honesty. But I can promise with absolute certainty that I will never, ever leave you. Not when things are difficult. Not when you're angry with me. Not when you're sad or struggling. Never. You don't have to call me Dad if you're not comfortable with that. You don't have to think of me that way at all if it doesn't feel right. But I'm here. Always. Jackson studied him intensely for a long moment, searching carefully for any hint of dishonesty or insincerity, then finally nodded his acceptance. The proposal itself happened at Millennium Park where Nate had proposed years before, but this time there were no photographers, no performance, no audience, just their small family and one heartfelt question. Will you marry me and let me love all 3 of you for the rest of my life? Claire said yes through happy tears. They married in an intimate ceremony at the Garfield Park Conservatory, surrounded by lush flowers and ferns, and a handful of people who genuinely mattered most to them. Carter and Jackson wore matching navy suits, carrying the wedding rings on small velvet pillows with such intense, adorable concentration that guests laughed warmly throughout the processional. Maya Brooks, Claire's best friend who'd witnessed every struggle and heartbreak of the past brutal decade, sobbed openly and joyfully throughout the entire ceremony. Dom's vows were simple but utterly devastating in their heartfelt sincerity. Claire, you taught me that real strength isn't loud or flashy. It's quiet, consistent, and absolutely relentless. Carter, Jackson, you taught me that family isn't defined by biology or legal obligation. It's defined by conscious choice and unwavering commitment through good times and bad. I choose you 3 today, and I'll choose you again tomorrow and every single day after that for the rest of my life. When the officiant pronounced them married, the boys cheered loudly and immediately tackled Dom in an enthusiastic group hug that knocked his carefully pinned boutonniere completely loose. Claire laughed until happy tears streamed freely down her face, completely overwhelmed by the beautiful, impossible truth that devastating heartbreak and cruel abandonment had somehow, miraculously led her here, to this moment, to this imperfect but genuine and deeply loving family. The small reception was filled with terrible dad jokes that made the twins groan dramatically while secretly smiling. The legal adoption happened 3 months later in a modest courtroom with only their immediate family present to witness. The judge, an older woman with kind, understanding eyes, asked Carter and Jackson if they truly understood what adoption meant. Carter answered first, his voice clear and thoughtful beyond his years. It means Dom is choosing to be our father officially and legally, even though he already was in every way that actually matters in real life. Jackson added, his voice noticeably thick with barely controlled emotion. It means we're really a family now, not just in our hearts where we already knew it, but on paper too, forever and officially. The judge smiled warmly at them both. That's exactly right, young man. You understand perfectly. When she signed the final papers with a flourish, Carter and Jackson officially became Carter Winters Marshall and Jackson Winters Marshall. Dom hugged them both tightly, whispering something Claire couldn't quite hear, but that made both boys nod with serious, solemn expressions. Later that evening, Dom confessed what he'd said. Your biological father made a choice to leave when responsibilities got difficult. I'm making a choice to stay through absolutely everything. Good, bad, easy, difficult, joyful, painful. And I'll keep making that choice every single day for the rest of my life. That night, the boys carefully hung their new birth certificates on their bedroom wall, beside treasured family photos, tangible proof of belonging they'd never had before. The following years unfolded with unexpected peace and steady, meaningful growth. Claire's firm, Winters Design Group, expanded from just her working alone at a kitchen table to a thriving team of 50 talented architects and designers. She deliberately took on projects that created genuine meaning rather than just profit, affordable housing developments in underserved neighborhoods, welcoming community centers that became neighborhood hearts, libraries designed to feel safe and inspiring rather than institutional and intimidating. Her work earned numerous humanitarian design awards, magazine covers, and speaking invitations at architecture conferences worldwide. But she remained remarkably grounded, always prioritizing sacred family dinners, where they took turns sharing their day's highest and lowest moments. Dom's company grew exponentially into a respected global powerhouse, but he consciously resisted the typical CEO lifestyle of constant networking events and superficial social climbing, preferring quiet evenings at home with his family. The twins thrived beautifully. Carter inherited Claire's artistic sensitivity and deep empathy, spending countless hours sketching innovative building designs beside his mother. Jackson inherited Dom's strategic thinking and fierce protective loyalty, already discussing ambitious business school plans. They were bright, kind, remarkably grounded young men who called Dom by his first name out of respect for complicated emotional truths, but loved him completely and unconditionally as the father he'd truly become. When Carter and Jackson were 15, Claire noticed Dom growing increasingly distant and preoccupied, his mind clearly elsewhere during conversations, distracted during family dinners. She worried he was seriously ill with something he wasn't sharing, or perhaps regretting their life together in some way. Finally, one quiet night after the boys had gone to bed, she confronted him directly. What's wrong? You've been mentally somewhere else for weeks now. Please talk to me. Dom exhaled slowly, his face heavy with obvious pain. There's something I should have told you years ago, he admitted, his voice strained with guilt. I didn't tell you at the time because I desperately want our relationship to be purely about us, about who we are together, not about him in the past. Her stomach dropped with sudden dread. Him? Who are you talking about? Dom pulled an old photograph from his wallet, one she'd never seen before, a faded family portrait from decades ago. He pointed to a young boy of maybe 8 standing beside a teenage boy of perhaps 16 or 17. That's me when I was little, and that's my half-brother. He pointed to the teenager, and Claire's entire world tilted violently off its axis. Even in the faded age photograph, she recognized him instantly and unmistakably. Nathaniel Carson, her ex-husband, the father who'd abandoned her sons. Her hand flew to her mouth. Dom's explanation came in a desperate rush, words tumbling over each other anxiously. We shared the same mother, but had different fathers. When she died 15 years ago, Nathaniel forged her will and stole my entire inheritance. The family company she'd built, the properties, everything she'd worked for. He had lawyers create completely fake documents. I was cut out totally, left with absolutely nothing but my name. I haven't spoken to him since. He ran both hands through his hair anxiously. I didn't know who you were at first. You never mentioned his full name, just called him my ex or their biological father. But about 2 years after we met, I saw an old business magazine profile about his company that mentioned his brief first marriage to an architect named Claire Cole. The timeline matched your story perfectly. He looked at her desperately, searching her face. I almost told you immediately, but I was already deeply in love with you by then. I was terrified that if you knew about my connection to him, you'd think I'd approached you cynically for revenge, that our entire relationship was somehow tainted or built on lies. But I swear on everything I love, Claire, I didn't marry you to hurt him. I married you because you're the strongest, most remarkable person I've ever known. Claire felt simultaneously betrayed and strangely understood, anger and compassion warring violently inside her chest as she processed this revelation. Claire processed Dom's shocking revelation over several difficult days, talking it through extensively with Maya, with her therapist, with herself during long solitary walks along the lakefront where she'd always gone to think clearly. She felt genuinely hurt that he'd kept such a significant secret from her for years, but she also understood his reasoning on a deeper level. He wanted desperately to protect what they were building together from Nate's toxic, poisonous shadow. Eventually, after much painful reflection, she realized a fundamental truth. Dom had given her and her sons 8 solid years of genuine love, unwavering support, and consistent presence. Nate's biological connection to Dom didn't change the reality of their family or diminish what they'd built together through hard work and commitment. She told Dom firmly, "No more secrets between us, ever, about anything important." He agreed solemnly, visibly relieved she wasn't leaving him. Life continued. The revelation absorbed and forgiven, their bond somehow stronger for having weathered the storm together. The twins graduated high school with impressive academic honors. Carter enrolled at the University of Chicago to study architecture, like his mother, Jackson at Northwestern to study business and economics. They were 23 now, confident and remarkably capable young men who looked eerily similar to their biological father, but carried themselves with Dom's quiet integrity and Claire's hard-earned resilience. Then everything changed when an unexpected envelope arrived at Claire's office on an ordinary Tuesday morning in late spring. Claire's assistant brought the envelope in looking confused and slightly concerned. This was hand-delivered by a private courier service about 10 minutes ago. No return address, but it's addressed specifically to you. The envelope was heavy cream cardstock, expensive and gold embossed, obviously from someone with money. Claire opened it carefully with growing unease. Inside was a formal invitation printed on thick, luxurious paper. You are cordially invited to the engagement celebration of Nathaniel Carson and Isabel Crane. Saturday, June 10th, 8 o'clock in the evening. The Belmont Estate, Aspen, Colorado. Black tie required. Her hands began trembling involuntarily. She hadn't heard his name spoken aloud in over 2 decades. Tucked behind a formal invitation was a second piece of paper, this one with a typed message in plain, threatening font. Attend the gala, or I will ensure the world knows what you've been hiding. Your secrets aren't as buried as you think. You have 1 week to decide. Claire's heart raced uncomfortably. What secrets? She'd built her career honestly, raised her sons with integrity, had nothing shameful to hide from anyone. She immediately called Dom, her voice shaking noticeably. His response was immediate and cold with barely controlled anger. That address? Aspen. He's getting remarried to someone new. And someone wants you there badly enough to threaten you. This is definitely a trap, Claire. That evening, the entire family gathered solemnly in the living room for an emergency meeting, the ominous invitation sitting on the coffee table between them like something genuinely dangerous. Carter studied it thoughtfully, his architect's analytical mind examining every detail. Jackson's jaw was clenched tight, with barely controlled protective anger. Dom sat close beside Claire, his hand firmly holding hers. What secret could they possibly mean? Carter asked reasonably, "You've never done anything wrong or unethical." Claire shook her head, genuinely confused and frightened. "I don't know. I've always been completely honest in my work, paid every tax, never deliberately hurt anyone. I have absolutely nothing to hide from the world." Dom's expression was dark with concern and suspicion. "This feels deliberately orchestrated, like someone setting up a very public confrontation. They want you there specifically, for a reason we don't understand yet." Jackson's eyes flashed with fierce protective fury. "Then we don't go. Simple. We don't give him or whoever sent us the satisfaction of showing up." But Carter disagreed thoughtfully. "Maybe we should go. Maybe it's finally time he has to face what he did to us, to Mom. Maybe he needs to see that we didn't just survive without him, we thrived." The room fell into contemplative silence. Claire looked at her sons. No longer helpless babies, but strong, capable men who become extraordinary people despite their father's cruel abandonment. "If we go," she said slowly, her voice gaining strength, "we go on our terms, not for revenge or to cause a scene. We go to show him we don't need his validation. We already won." The Belmont estate, Aspen, Colorado, the gala night. Planning the gala approach became almost a strategic family project over the following week. Carter, always a more thoughtful and creative twin, proposed an intriguing idea. What if I pose as a documentary filmmaker doing a piece on successful CEOs? I could get access to him, ask him questions on camera about family and legacy, see what he says when he doesn't know who I really am. Jackson initially resisted strongly, wanting immediate direct confrontation, but eventually agreed reluctantly to a more calculated approach. He would arrive separately after Carter's interview, a deliberate secondary shock. Dom uses extensive resources and business connections to arrange everything professionally, a legitimate-looking camera crew, official press credentials, even registering a fake production company, LLC, to make the cover story completely convincing. Maya helped Claire select a perfect dress, a deep navy gown that was undeniably elegant without being flashy, powerful without screaming for attention. The night before they left for Aspen, Claire couldn't sleep at all, her mind racing with possibilities. Dom found her on the balcony at 2 a.m, staring pensively at the Chicago skyline she'd helped shape. "Second thoughts?" he asked gently. She shook her head slowly. "No, I'm just remembering who I was when I first met him. That scared, naive girl who thought she needed someone else to complete her. I wanted to see who I became after he left, not to spite him, but because surviving him made me stronger." The Belmont estate sat nestled dramatically against the Rocky Mountains like an obscene, overwhelming display of excessive wealth. All dramatic glass walls, and imported Italian marble and architectural excess that prioritized show over substance. The circular driveway was lined with luxury vehicles that cost more than most people's houses: Bentleys, Maseratis, Teslas. Even a pristine vintage Rolls-Royce. Guests arrived draped in furs despite the mild June warmth, dripping with diamonds that caught the setting sun. The kind of people who measure personal worth entirely in zeros and exclusive social connections. Inside the massive estate, enormous crystal chandeliers refracted light, like fractured starlight across polished marble floors. A professional string quartet played Vivaldi near an elaborate ice sculpture of intertwined swans that was already beginning to melt in the warmth. Waiters in crisp white gloves circulated silently with champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres that cost more than Claire used to make an entire week of waitressing. Nathaniel Carson stood prominently at the top of the grand marble staircase, greeting arriving guests with practiced charm, and that magnetic smile Claire remembered too painfully well. He'd aged, silver threading his temples now, fine lines around his eyes, but he still carried himself with that effortless confidence that had once swept her completely off her feet. Beside him, his fiancée Isabel Crane looked radiant in white silk, young and beautiful, and seemingly genuinely warm as she smiled welcomingly at guests. The limousine carrying Claire, Dom, and Carter arrived fashionably late, exactly as they carefully planned for maximum impact. When the driver opened the door and Claire emerged gracefully, the effect was immediate and dramatic. Conversations didn't just pause. They stopped completely and entirely. She moved with unhurried grace up the steps, her navy gown catching the golden evening light perfectly. Dom beside her in an immaculately tailored tuxedo, and Carter following just behind him in his documentary filmmaker disguise. Heads turned in almost comical unison. Whispers erupted and spread like wildfire through the crowd. "Who is that woman?" someone murmured with obvious curiosity. "She's absolutely stunning." Another voice replied with genuine appreciation. "Wait, is that Dominic Marshall? The tech billionaire? What's he doing here at Carson's party?" Recognition rippled through guests who follow business news closely. The crowd instinctively parted as they entered the grand foyer, sensing significance and importance without understanding the full explosive context. Claire's eyes calmly swept the opulent room, taking everything in with composed observation. Then her gaze landed directly on Nate, standing at the top of the staircase. For one suspended, breathless moment, their eyes locked across 23 years of absolute silence and unanswered questions. Nate's champagne glass froze halfway to his lips, his entire body going rigid. His face showed confusion first, something maddeningly familiar he couldn't quite place. Then slowly, terribly, recognition began to dawn across his features like a horrible sunrise. Isabel Crane noticed Nate's reaction immediately, her sharp eyes missing absolutely nothing. "Darling, what's wrong?" she whispered with growing concern, touching his arm gently. He didn't respond, couldn't form coherent words. His mind was frantically scrambling, trying desperately to reconcile the sophisticated, obviously successful woman standing confidently in his foyer with the broken, desperate girl he divorced and dismissed decades ago. Could that possibly be? No, absolutely impossible. She disappeared completely, vanished into poverty and obscurity where he genuinely assumed she belonged, where he convinced himself she'd stayed. But this woman radiated unmistakable success, confidence, power. And the distinguished man beside her, Nate's breath caught painfully in his chest. Dominic, his half-brother, the one he deliberately betrayed and systematically stolen from 20 years ago. What was he doing here? With her? The pieces began clicking together in his mind in a way that made his chest tighten with genuine dread. Isabel squeezed his arm harder, her voice more insistent. "Nathaniel, you're scaring me." "Who are they?" He finally found his voice, though it emerged strangled and weak. "Ghosts," he whispered, his face visibly pale. "They're ghosts I thought I'd buried forever." Below in the foyer, Claire accepted a champagne flute from a passing waiter, took a small, deliberate sip, and smiled warmly at Dom with genuine affection. She hadn't even glanced at Nate again. Somehow, inexplicably, that complete dismissal was worse than any angry glare could have been. Carter approached Nate with disarming professionalism, his camera operator and sound technician flanking him perfectly. "Mr. Carson, I'm Carter Mitchell from American Visionaries documentary series. We're currently filming episodes about the nation's most innovative and successful CEOs for a special series. Would you be willing to answer just a few questions for our segment on visionary leadership?" Nate's ego, even when rattled and confused, simply couldn't resist such flattery. A documentary? About his success? Perfect timing right before the wedding announcement. He forced his most charming smile back into place, deliberately pushing thoughts of Claire and Dom aside temporarily. "Of course," he said smoothly, descending the staircase with practiced confidence. "I'm always happy to share insights from my journey to help inspire the next generation." They set up efficiently in a dramatic corner of the grand salon, where the lighting was particularly flattering. Isabel watched intently from nearby, her expression unreadable and strangely focused. Carter began with comfortable softball questions, business philosophy, keys to sustained success, advice for ambitious young entrepreneurs. Nate relaxed completely into familiar territory, his answers polished and rehearsed from years of media interviews and public speaking. Then Carter's tone shifted subtly but noticeably. "What drives you most fundamentally, Mr. Carson? At the end of every day, what truly matters to you?" Nate leaned back confidently. "Legacy. Building something meaningful that outlasts your own lifetime. That's what genuinely separates great men from those who are simply forgotten by history." Carter's eyes glinted with something dangerous. "And family? Does family factor into your definition of legacy?" Nate's confident expression flickered briefly, almost imperceptibly. "Family is complicated. Real success sometimes requires difficult sacrifices that others might not understand fully." Carter leaned forward slightly, the camera still rolling steadily, capturing everything. "Do you have children, Mr. Carson?" The question hung in the air between them like smoke, heavy and ominous. Nate felt suddenly, inexplicably exposed, though he couldn't articulate exactly why. "No," he stated firmly, definitively. "I never had children." Carter nodded slowly, his face maintaining careful neutrality. "Never," he pressed deliberately. "Not even once?" Nate's irritation flared visibly now. Is there actually a point to this particular line of questioning? Carter carefully set down his interview notes, and his entire professional demeanor shifted dramatically. The polite filmmaker mask slipped away completely, replaced by something raw and deeply painful. "That's genuinely interesting, Mr. Carson. Because I'm looking directly at my father right now, and he just told a camera that I don't exist. The words detonated through the immediate area, like a bomb. Nearby conversations died instantly. Guests turned to stare openly. Nate's face drained of all color. What did you just say? Carter stood, rising to his full height, which was considerably taller than Nate had initially realized, and stepped closer. His voice shook slightly, but held remarkably firm. My name isn't Carter Mitchell. It's Carter Winters Marshall, my twin brother, and I were born 23 years ago in Chicago. You held us exactly once for a magazine photo opportunity. Then you walked out of hospital and never looked back. Not once in 23 years. The main entrance doors burst open with dramatic, perfect timing, and Jackson strode in with absolute purpose, identical to his brother in every devastating detail. The physical resemblance to a young Nathaniel Carson was impossible to deny or dismiss. Same strong jawline, same intense dark eyes, same athletic build, same commanding presence. Gasps rippled outward through the crowd like waves. Well-dressed women clutched their pearl necklaces. Men immediately pulled out their phones to capture the unfolding drama. Jackson walked directly toward Nate with unwavering focus, his footsteps echoing on marble. Nate stood completely frozen, his expensive champagne glass slipping from nerveless fingers and shattering dramatically on the floor. The sound echoed through the suddenly silent ballroom like a gunshot. You told him you never had children, Jackson said, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed space. Let me help refresh your obviously failing memory. He pulled out a photograph, old and creased from being carried, and looked at countless times, showing a much younger Nate in a hospital room holding two tiny swaddled infants, smiling broadly for the camera in that single moment of performed fatherhood. This photograph was taken 23 years ago in Chicago. You posed for exactly one picture, then left the hospital within hours and never came back. Not once. Our mother struggled alone for 6 months, waiting for you to call, to help, to care. Then you sent divorce papers when we were 6 months old. He held the photograph up high for the entire crowd to see clearly. A woman nearby gasped audibly. A man muttered, "Oh my God!" Nate's carefully constructed world was actively collapsing in real time, and everyone was watching. Claire rose from where she'd been standing calmly near the windows, observing the scene with careful, measured composure. Every single eye in the room turned to watch her as she crossed the floor with deliberate grace, her heels clicking rhythmically on marble. Dom stayed protectively close, but consciously let her lead this crucial moment. She stopped a few feet from Nate, close enough that he could clearly see the woman she'd become, far enough to maintain her hard-won dignity. "Hello, Nathaniel," she said quietly, her voice remarkably steady despite emotions churning violently inside. His eyes went wide with complete recognition now. "Claire," he whispered, her name coming out broken and disbelieving. "It's been a very long time." She smiled, but the expression didn't reach her eyes at all. 23 years, to be precise. You still remember how to count, apparently. His mouth open and closed uselessly, no sound emerging. She continued, her voice remaining soft but utterly devastating in its calm honesty. "These are your sons, Nathaniel, Carter and Jackson. They're brilliant, compassionate, successful young men. They graduated at the top of their classes. They're building remarkable lives and making genuine differences in the world. And you missed absolutely everything. First words, first steps, first days of school, first heartbreaks, proms, graduations, every single milestone that mattered." She paused, letting the full weight settle heavily on him. "Not because you couldn't be there. Not because of circumstances beyond your control. Because you deliberately chose not to be. You chose to run away." She lifted her sleeve slowly, revealing a long surgical scar across her abdomen. "This is what you ran from 23 years ago. Me, almost dying. Them, needing you. Responsibility." The crowd gasped collectively. Isabel Crane stepped forward decisively, and her expression stopped Claire's next words completely. The young woman's face had transformed from confusion to something much harder, colder, more calculated and purposeful. "Nathaniel," Isabel said, her voice cutting cleanly through the heavy tension. I need to tell you something important right now. Nate turned to her desperately, seeking any ally in this nightmare. Isabel, please, I can explain. No, she interrupted firmly. You can't, because I already know everything. She addressed the entire room now, her voice clear and unwavering. I discovered the complete truth about Nathaniel's past approximately 6 months ago. I found old newspaper articles, divorce records, hospital documents. I learned he'd abandoned his wife when she was recovering from life-threatening surgery, that he'd walked out on his newborn sons without a backward glance. She looked at Nate with something resembling pity mixed with disgust. When I initially confronted you about what I'd found, you lied directly to my face. You told me she was mentally unstable, that the children weren't biologically yours, that you'd been the victim in the situation. So I started investigating more deeply. She turned to Claire with genuine regret. I'm truly sorry I sent that threatening letter. I needed to be absolutely certain you'd come tonight, because he needed to face this publicly with witnesses. Men like him only feel genuine shame when they have an audience. Nate's face crumbled visibly. You orchestrated this entire thing. Isabel pulled off her engagement ring, held it up for everyone to see clearly, then dropped it decisively into his abandoned champagne glass with a definitive splash. There's no wedding, Nathaniel. There never was going to be one. Dominic Marshall finally stepped forward, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop noticeably. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried absolute, undeniable authority. Hello, little brother. Nate's eyes went wide with pure horror. Dominic, he breathed, the name barely audible. Dom nodded once. It's been many countless years since you forged Mother's will and systematically stole my entire inheritance from her estate. Many years since you cut me out of the family company completely and left me with absolutely nothing. He paused deliberately, letting that sink into the crowd that was now completely riveted. I spent those countless years building my own empire from the ground up, Marshall Global. Perhaps you've heard of it. Murmurs of immediate recognition rippled through the guests. Everyone in business circles knew Marshall Global's reputation. Dom continued calmly. And during those years, I did something you never anticipated or imagined possible. I began quietly purchasing shares of Carson Enterprises through various shell companies and investment firms. Small amounts at first, never enough to trigger disclosure requirements or draw attention. Patient, methodical, strategic. He smiled without any warmth. As of last month, I own 51% of your company, Nathaniel. You've been working for me for the last 18 months without even knowing it. The crowd erupted in genuinely shocked whispers and gasps. Nate physically swayed on his feet, grabbing desperately at a nearby chair for support. Dom moved to stand beside Claire, his hand finding hers naturally. You didn't just lose your wife and children. You lost them to your own brother. And unlike you, I will never take them for granted. Because that's the fundamental difference between you and me. You build empires. I build families. The room fell silent. Then slowly, someone began to clap. Within moments, the entire ballroom was applauding for Claire, Dom, and the twins. For survival. For resilience. For love that conquered abandonment. Nate stood utterly alone, completely shattered, while Claire finally fell free. Not through revenge, but through simply living well